to Automation Smackdown, Clicks versus Code. I'm Melissa Shepard. I am a Senior Technical Architect. But first of all, I'd like to thank all of our sponsors. If you haven't been able to visit them yet, please do so downstairs, because without them, we wouldn't be able to have this great event. They are one of the most important parts of having a community conference, because this is organized by the community and not by Salesforce. So sponsors are one of the biggest parts of these events. So a little bit about me. I'm a certified technical architect, 37 times certified. I'm a Salesforce MVP, a MuleSoft, Ladies Be Architects, and Well-Architected Ambassador, marketing champion. I'm the founder of a program called Scale Up Arcs, and also the founder of the Architect Ohana Slack group. Also the Boston Architect User Group co-leader, and I do organize a couple of community events myself, one being Northeast Dreamin', which will be happening in October in Manchester, New Hampshire, and Architect Dreamin'. And if you'd like to connect with me, please find me on Twitter or LinkedIn. So a little bit about this session. I'm going to present to you some content from the Well-Architected framework. That is something Salesforce has put out recently to help guide people in decision-making to make better architectural decisions on the platform. So this session is focused on the record-triggered automation. So first of all, what is automation? It's a word we all hear. And it's really just something that is a streamlined process that is meant to reduce or eliminate manual steps and involves some sort of transaction or multiple transactions that happen simultaneously, which can be asynchronous, like in parallel, or in a specific order, which would be a synchronous automation. So an example here would be a user clicks a button on a page that fires off a set of related transactions to happen all at once, instead of the user doing all of those things separately themselves. So some ways to do this. So in the record-triggered automation from Well-Architected, there's both Flow and Apex, which are the preferred no-code and pro-code solutions for triggered automations. The second thing you'll see here is do not use workflow rules or process builders anymore and convert anything existing to Flow. So that's what the Well-Architected documentation recommends, and I think a lot of people know. These things are being retired, but also later in this presentation, you'll see why you do not want to use those things anymore and why they're probably going away. Also, for things like high-performance batch processing, or when you have highly sophisticated implementation logic, you really should be using Apex. And then you really want to think about how you're organizing and maintaining your automations for the long term. So thinking of not one flow per object or not one trigger per object if you're using Apex. So a little bit about record-triggered flows. So this is a very commonly used automation, probably one of the most common now on the platform. It really is the easiest way to interact with the records and the data in your org. It's a declarative automation tool. And really the job of record-triggered flow is if something happens, then do something else. So these are things that get triggered by the platform. So for record-triggered flows, the trigger determines which object the flow acts on and when it runs. So you have before save and after save triggers in flow. So you have only when a record is created, anytime a record is updated, anytime a record is created or updated, or only when a record is deleted. So next we have Apex triggers. Apex can be invoked by using triggers. That enables you to perform custom actions before or after changes to Salesforce records, just like flow triggers. And it's the programmatic automation tool on the platform. So there's two types of Apex triggers, both before and after, same as flow. Also, a trigger is Apex code that executes before or after on the following types of operations: insert, update, delete, merge, upsert, and undelete. So why the right selection is important? Well, this will have an impact on performance and scalability, maintainability. Also, you have to take into consideration skill sets of your people that are implementing your automations, and then also time to value and overall cost. So it's not just one thing versus the other, but there's a lot of different factors that go into your decision making. So that's where the well-architected record-triggered automation decision guide comes in. So as you can see here, we have a bunch of different types of operations, and we're going from low code to pro code. And this will show you what is available, what you can't do, and then what is kind of like not an ideal choice for that operation. And we'll get into this in a little bit more detail. So the first thing is, this is round one of our Smackdown here. We have same record field update. So as you can see, we've got all the different options. We've got before save flow, we've got after save flow, we've got after save flow with Apex, and then we have just pure Apex triggers. So this is for same record update. So as you can see here, your green boxes for the before save flow, that is actually a preferred way to do this. After save flow, not ideal, and I'll show you why. After save with Apex, also not ideal. And then Apex triggers, it is an ideal solution for this. This is gonna minimize the number of same record field updates that occur after the save. And then before save flow triggers or before save Apex triggers are the optimal way to perform same record updates. So here you can see we have some performance metrics, and this is straight out of the well-architected documentation. So we have a single trigger, a single record created from the UI, and using the Apex debug log duration for how long it takes for these operations. So as you can see here, before save Apex is going to be your fastest option. But what many of you might not know is just after that, we have the before save flow trigger. That is actually not going to be that bad when it comes to performance. Then the next option we have is the after save Apex, and then we have workflow rules. And then we have the after save flow. So you can see that once we start getting into after save flow, the performance actually starts to degrade a bit. But the last two, process builder and auto launch flow or process builder, worst performance we have on the platform. So good reason to get rid of them and just move to flow. But you always want to think about if you can do the same record updates, go with a before save flow if you're going declarative. So knocked out, process builder is knocked out of this round. There's a horrible, horrible solution. It's going away, don't use it, just don't even think about them anymore. And if you have them, convert them to flow as soon as possible. So same record updates performed anywhere between 10 to 20 times faster when implemented with using before save triggers than when implemented using workflow rules or process builder. Round two. This round is going to be for the high performance batch processing. So as you can see here, there's not a lot of great options. We've got the before save flow, not ideal. After save flow, not ideal. After save flow with Apex doesn't make a difference because it's still being triggered by flow, but then Apex triggers. That really is your optimal solution here. So your Apex is gonna allow you to perform complex logic in these batch scenarios. The flow continues to be more constrained and less feature-rich than Apex. Also, scheduled flows can currently do a batch operation on up to 250,000 records per day, something many of you may not know, so there are some performance and scalability issues there. And then scheduled paths and record trigger flows do support configurable batch sizes. That's actually pretty cool. But if you have any large batch processing, you really don't want to use flow for that. You still want to stick with Apex there. So some performance metrics here. So this is using 50 triggers with 50,000 records inserted via the bulk API and 200 record batches. So you can see here your before save Apex, still the best performance. Before save flow, not that bad. It's just right there after the before save Apex. But once you get into workflow rules, after save flow triggers and process builder, performance isn't that good. So this is showing you why you do not want to use the after save flow or process builder for any of your batch processing. It's not going to be performant, and it's going to really affect your scalability and performance in the long run. Round three, we've got our cross-object CRUD operation. So this is creating, updating, or deleting a different record other than the original record that triggered the transaction, which requires a database operation. So can't do this with before save flow, so you're restricted to after save flow with Apex or an Apex trigger. So Apex outperforms flow in the raw database operation speed, less time for the Apex runtime to prepare, form, and process the result. But this doesn't mean you have to use Apex. It's still a good option to use Flow if you don't have large amounts of processing that you need to do. Also, taking into consideration your skill sets, and do you already have an Apex framework, things like that. Round 4, we've got our complex list processing. So many of you might be familiar with trying to do some of this in Flow. Not the easiest thing. It's getting better. They're introducing more functionality with being able to sort collections and things like that. But you can see, not available in before save flows, not ideal in after save flows, but if you're using after save flow with Apex or Apex triggers, those are the ideal situations. Those are the ideal solutions for those. So Flow does offer a limited set of basic list processing. So there's filtering and sorting, as I mentioned, and then you can also use Apex to, but you can call from Flow to do some of your more complex processing for list processing. You can't do things like maps. You can't reference an item in a Flow collection. So that's stuff that you could do by calling an Apex invocable method from Flow. And that's what that means when I say the record change Flow plus Apex. That's calling Apex invocables. Also, something to note, in Flow, loops are executed serial at runtime. So even with batch processing, the SOCL or DML operations within a loop are not bulkified. So why do we care about this? Well, this will affect governor limits. I actually was just working on something on a Flow recently where they were hitting the Apex CPU timeout limit in a Flow. It's because it was querying too many records, putting it into a collection, and then trying to filter that collection too many times in a loop. So you can easily run into governor limits and performance issues in Flow. Round 5. This is our asynchronous processing round, and this is actually one of my favorite topics. I presented on this, just about this specifically, how you can do this with both Flow and Apex, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. So you can see here, you cannot do asynchronous processing in before save flows. You can do it with after save flows, after save flow with Apex, and then Apex triggers. So Flow does offer a fixed amount of retries and some basic error handling via its fault path for asynchronous processing. But Apex does offer more direct control. The run asynchronously in Flow will also potentially allow for more stateful capabilities in the future. So it's getting better, and there's a few different ways you can run your flows asynchronously. So you have your scheduled triggered flows. That's if you want something to run at a specific time and frequency. Maybe check the status of change records on an interval. That would be a good use case for a scheduled triggered flow, as long as your record counts aren't too high. Then there's flow with asynchronous path. So you can connect a record triggered flow to an external system, maybe through this external path. So when this flow fires, you can have an operation done on this asynchronous path that's not going to interfere with the rest of your processing. And that's maybe if you need to send data to a downstream system. Then there's also flow with asynchronous Apex invocable action. So this is combining flow and Apex. So you can move some of your complex logic to an Apex action, and then do some sort of heavy calculations and complex processing, and then update a field with the results, and then return back to your flow. And then there's also flow that creates platform events. So this is going to be your event-driven integration. So event-driven automation here. So there's also a whole well-architected page just on event-driven automation. So this is maybe if you want to update some related records when subscribing to a platform event, or you can send data to an external system as well using platform events. So a good example is you have an opportunity, and that could be a large data volume object quite often, and then you maybe need to update related order and order line items from a change on the opportunity. You wouldn't want to do that synchronously. You want to do that asynchronously, and you can fire off a platform event that then goes and updates that related order and order line items. And that's where I see a lot of performance issues quite often, is when an object and all its related objects are trying to be updated synchronously in the same transaction. So you really want to try to stay away from that. Next, we have asynchronous apex. So this is programmatic. You get higher governor limits and execution limits when you use asynchronous apex. So some examples here, you've got future methods. These are for executing long-running operations, so they run in their own thread and do not start until resources are available. So maybe you have a field on your account that needs to calculate number of open cases every time something is updated. Whenever a case is opened or closed, you could have some complex processing that does that through a future method. There's also the batch apex, which we talked about earlier. This is great for running large jobs that would exceed normal processing limits. So maybe you're going to do some manual data cleansing that you perform in your own logic, or you've got to archive some records. You could determine which records need to be flagged for archiving. You could run these jobs in scheduled batch apex. And then there's queuable apex. This is similar to future methods, but it provides additional job chaining and it allows for more complex data types to be used. So really, the queuable is kind of like the newer, better version of future methods. So you can use the complex data types with them, which you can't with future. And then the scheduled apex. So you can schedule apex to run at a specific time, kind of like how you can schedule flow. Maybe you need daily, weekly tasks, such as mass updates on records. Round 6. This is our last round, and this is an interesting one. So custom validation errors. This was not available until very recently in Flow. So really the only way you could do this was with Apex. So this is if you want to have custom error messages instead of just the default error message that comes from Flow errors. You can now throw these custom errors, and actually you can write complicated validation rules using record triggered flows instead of before save apex trigger. So this is actually really cool. Should be exciting for anyone that does a lot of declarative development on the platform. I've used it. It works really well. You get these really nice error messages that pop up just like you were to build a validation rule. And this came with the Winter 24 release that just happened this past winter. So now that's available in all the different ways to automate. So recap for designing your record-triggered automation. So really you want to use one tool or framework per object because this is important because of order of execution. That can become an issue because Apex and Flow fire at different times, and you can't, when it comes to working with both of them, you can't always guarantee what's going to happen first, but you can with flows if you're only using Flow. So point number 4, when you're using flows, you want to use your flow trigger ordering to ensure the order of your execution for your flows. Also, something else to really keep in mind when building out your flows, if you're going with the flow option, is try to use parent flows that orchestrate different subflows. So your subflows are going to be auto-launch flows, and they're going to have reusable logic, similar to building Apex patterns with helper classes. So you want to think about like maybe what is reusable, what you can reuse, and your parent flows can call these subflows that are just almost like reusable pieces of code. And then I always like to try to align these parent flows to represent specific business processes, because that's kind of like a separation of concerns. You're not combining multiple business processes into big complex flows, but it's more maintainable, easier to pinpoint what's going on and where when you have business logic all in one parent flow. But if you're using Apex, you also want to try to use Apex trigger frameworks and Apex design patterns. And then you always want to consider your governor limits for both Flow and Apex. So an example is having loops within loops is never a good idea, whether you're using Flow or Apex. Just always take these things into consideration. So I mentioned order of execution. Always keep this in mind when combining your automation tools. So this is something you really should get familiar with. This is a really nice order of execution diagram that we got from Anoop, who's a local here. I don't know if he's here today. But something I want to point out here is something that's changed in the order of execution on the platform is before save flow triggers in number 3 actually execute before save Apex triggers, which is step number 4. So That is something that has recently changed in the past few years, and it's very important to take into consideration when building your automations on the platform and combining Apex and Flow. So some conclusions here. Flow is faster and easier for low volumes and less complex processing. You want to use Apex triggers if you already have a framework in place, as well as a DevOps and CI/CD process and the skill sets to support those. So those are also very important things to consider. You want to use Apex for your more complex, higher volume processing, and it's not just one versus the other, but it's both. You want to try to combine your automation tools on platform in the right way, and then taking into consideration things like your volumes and your complexity when choosing one versus the other, as well as your skill sets. Also, here are some resources. If you would like to look at the documentation for this, there's the Salesforce Well-Architected documentation, but there's also the automated documentation that I pulled this from, actually specifically the third trigger. The third bullet point is the record-triggered automation that this came from. So this information is directly from Well-Architected. If you're interested in digging in more, there's a ton of information in there. I just kind of pulled out the important parts and what I thought would be good for you guys to learn and help you understand what this decision guide is trying to help you understand and learn. So, and then also some information about Architect Dreamin', how to join the Architect Ohana Slack, and then the order of execution from Anoop that I showed. And that's it. Thank you very much for coming today, and hope you enjoyed the presentation.